ICQ Podcast episode 404, Intro to Spectrum Analyzers. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to our 404th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported in this episode by Martin Malley, Whiskey Zero, Zulu Zulu Kilo, and our monthly subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Chris, Mike Zero, Tango Charlie Hotel, Martin, Mike Zero, Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie, Golf Zero Charlie India Bravo, to discuss latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is an introduction to spectrum analyzers. Well, as mentioned there, we are very happy and proud to have our donor in this episode, Martin Malley, join us, and his donation, along with the monthly subscription donors, show the value they find from the show and help us pay our bills and provide the services, etc., that we love to do for you guys in the general amateur radio community. Now, Martin kindly sent along a message, and he said it's for the whole ICQ group, and they keep him informed and useful in the work that we do, and full of great information, etc. And he looks forward to every release. So that's from Marty, Whiskey Zero Zulu Zulu Kilo. Now, it's a very easy way of showing your value for the show. What we do is we ask you to convert that value to a financial figure, whatever it means to you, and then go to icqpodcast.com/donate. Take one of our options on that page, and or make up one of your own. There's an option to make up your own there, and send it our way. And as I say, it helps us pay our way, and continue to invest into the service that we provide you. Right, then we're going to head on now with the rest of our fine show here to generate that value. So we're going to join Martin, Chris, Martin, Frank, Bill and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including a new distance record for SO50 and Australian license changes. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, welcome to episode 404 of the ICQ podcast and tonight's news roundtable. For that episode tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Martin. Here we are again. Blimey, doesn't it come round quick? Anyway, Episode 404. Things are rattling on. We're pushing ahead. So, yeah, good evening, Martin, and good evening, everybody else sitting in the wings.
Yeah. Well, it's as you say, it comes round really quick. I mean, it was only 8 weeks ago we did 400, so yes, rapid. Also in the UK, we got Mr. Martin Rothwell, who's definitely going to get me into trouble at some point in time. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
Hello. So I'm going to say 404, not found. No, we definitely are here. Ignore the error code. I know we're broadcasting on the internet, but 404, we are here.
All right.
If tells you something wrong, then write to Google and tell them they got it wrong.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. Didn't think of that one. Okay, jumping across the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin. Hey, everybody. And I used to live in the 404 area code.
Ah, well, there you go. Lots of things that ties to 404. We also have Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Martin. Good evening, everybody. Yes, 404. We're not talking about HTTP status codes. We're talking about another great episode.
Yeah, we should be. And last but not least, because I save him to the end, and then you can't play the railway signs anymore.
You've got to big him up. Come on, Martin. Big him right up. Come on, he loves it.
You can't play the railway signs as jingles anymore. We have Mr. Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB.
There he is. There he is. There he is. Just adding some drama, some tension to the recording tonight, yeah?
Good evening, Martin. The gremlins are happening tonight. Everything's going wrong. Going back to your question, no, I'm not at part of the railways anymore. I've moved on to pastures green and trying to make a different contribution to society. But there you go.
Yeah. Well, we're all back.
Well, that's my excuse.
Yeah. So we're all back this time, and let's see what we've got in the news today. Well, I'm going to start off with a new SO50 distance record. Now, SO50 is a satellite. It's been up there quite a while, but nice to see a new distance record. I'm going to pass it to Frank first. Yeah, what do you think, Frank?
Well, we talk about distance records with some frequency on the podcast, and there's a good reason. It's exciting. It's the reason we watch sports. It's the reason that we compare notes. Hey, how'd you do? You got this, I got that. And so this ham who lives in Illinois, but he was on a SOTA activation up in Michigan. And he is now one of two owners of the record for two locations. And I'm not sure one of the other presenters will have to nuance that. I don't operate SATs at this point, but almost 5,600 kilometers. And wow, if you look at his QRZ page, Kilo Echo 9 AJ, he is Joe Worth, and he's all about satellites. And just good on him. I'm just glad that all his efforts paid off in being a new world record holder.
Yeah, me too, Frank, because it does look like that the guy does a lot of good thing, and that's what floats his boat. And we, the hobby's big enough for all of us to have a go at something, and it's always nice to see when somebody does really well. Now, last time I saw you operate, Martin, was when Chris was trying to do a SOTA activation on HF, and you were standing behind us with an arrow antenna pointed at the sky, weren't you?
I was, and I had some great contacts on that. People were loving just having somebody new on the bird, and I think the second person I spoke to was actually someone that we knew. One of the guys, Pete from the Cam Hams, and that was good. And then somebody at the club came, "Hey, I heard you on AO51 or whatever the satellite was at the time," and like, oh my god, people are suddenly hearing things. It's incredible. Yeah, I've done satellites a couple of times. It's I stopped doing it because I changed my handheld, and the new handheld doesn't support having like however many 100 meg split on the repeater frequencies, and so you've got to program it different. And I haven't got round to it just because the programming software is a little bit more fiddly. But I look at this story and I see the distance they've achieved between two locations, 5,584 kilometers, and I thought to myself, how long is the normal distance that you can work on a satellite? I mean, I suppose it could be from one edge of the footprint to the other, but I've never thought about how far across the footprint covers. I know I spoke to someone we were sort of near where Worthing, somewhere like that, on the south coast. I spoke to someone on the tip of Scotland, on the far tip of Scotland. That's 700 or 800 miles, I think, maybe. I remember speaking to someone in Spain and someone over that way, but I've never thought about how far that actually is. But yeah, it's a contact is a contact. A lot of people would be happy just to hit the bird. I think Frank might have said that SO50 might be a bit harder to get into because you've got to send different CTCSS tones into it, one to wake it up and then one to use it. But either way, good on you. Keep the action on the satellites, and yeah, it's very much when you get your head around it, it's fairly simple to hit an FM satellite, but it's very, very different from anything that I've ever worked, be it repeaters, HF, anything before. It's so different, and congratulations to them for getting that in the log. Maybe it was luck. By oh my god, it just happens to be someone there. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds good though, doesn't it? It sounds good that he did that. And yeah, all power to his elbow. Leslie, I know you're an HF person, but any thoughts on this?
You're right. My thing is HF, and I do like playing a little bit on UHF. I'm not really a satellite person, but good luck to them. The hobby's big enough, and records are there to be broken, so more power to their elbow.
Yeah, well, as I say, I know you don't do satellites, but you certainly appreciate them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and what people do. Bill, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with everyone else. A few things about SO50. It's that one was launched on December of 2002. That's Science and Technology University in Saudi Arabia, if I remember correctly. And yeah, it's 2 meters up, UHF down, two different tones, one to arm the timer, one to actually talk through it. So that part's a little tricky. What I ended up doing was programming it two channels right next to each other, one with the uplink PL and the other one with the arm the timer PL. It's up pretty high. It's not low orbit. It's medium orbit, if I remember. So it does get a large footprint. I couldn't find anything where it said how theoretical large the footprint is, but this has to be close. And it is the ultimate DX, because I'm sure that they were not expecting to work each other that far away on that day, and I bet you it was a very exciting QSO.
Yeah, I'd suggest so. I would suggest the poor guys, and they look as though they're serious satellite boys, but just they put a call out, somebody comes back to you, you work them, you write their located down, then suddenly you did a quick calculation, and it must have been like winning the lottery for them. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, just looking at Joe's QIZ page, Joe Worth KE9AJ, the chap that's made this contact. Very impressive. Clearly, Joe is a big satellite operator. He's got lots of photographs on his page there with him holding I think it's an arrow antenna. He mentioned he's got a couple of aerials for handheld aerials, satellite work. But yeah, this guy's obviously a very serious satellite operator. I mean, it looks like his thing is to try to operate as distant, as he can. So he's got various records on his webpage, his personal distance records showing, his furthest distance on different satellites. So he's actually, very impressive. He also operated somebody in England's AO91. That was 6,215 kilometers. So this is obviously a serious thing for Joe, and very impressive. It's also nice that he's going out into the open and doing this. He's not just sitting at home with a rotator. He's actually getting out. So it must be quite a nice hobby. It looks like Joe's been licensed since the 70s, so he's obviously got lots and lots of experience. So really nice to see.
Yeah, great news on that one. Well, let's say it's nice to start off with a nice story that amateurs are doing well. Move to our next news story. The RSGB have set up what they call the school zone. And this is trying to build a list of schools and colleges that have got amateur radio stations and promote them. I think it's an interesting one. I'm going to go to you first, Leslie. What's your thoughts?
Well, you took me by surprise there, Martin, but never mind. My gut reaction, it is a good thing. Getting youngsters involved and trying to get youngsters interested in the hobby. The thing is with schools, is especially in this country, and I don't know what it's like in other countries, there is safeguarding issues, so there needs to be awareness on those. That's really my only concern. Do I think it's a good idea? Yes. Let's just go with it. Let's just see how it goes, and hopefully we get some more radio amateurs, and that's what we're always trying to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. And yes, in the UK, if you're an instructor, you've got to have been vetted, and you'll probably find that it's very difficult for us to go along to a school and say, hey, we'll set something up for you. But, hey, it's one of those things. Frank, I know you're over in the States, but what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, schools have been where young people are. So we've tried to, for decades and decades, try to involve young people, because as earlier work I did here in the state, most of the earliest hams, before there was a license and those kinds of things, were young people. So we've tended to follow that model. I'm very impressed with what the RSGB is doing. Now, they have a school zone, but they also have a university corner, and they have a similar organization for university. They have a page on school zone stories, which they're posting kind of show and tell, virtually speaking, of what these schools are doing. One thing I like about it is it's been more at the collegiate level, but a lot of times local school-oriented or based clubs don't really advertise. And as odd as it may sound, I know for a fact that there are college students who were licensed hams who didn't know their college or university had a ham club. It was virtually hidden, and only those who were in it, I don't think it was an intentional thing, but just don't think about PR and that kind of thing. Well, here's a national society trying to help in that regard, because they're identifying specific schools with contact information, website link, pictures, show and tell of what they're doing. And that kind of social engineering, I think, is a very good thing. How effective will it be? Who knows? But certainly all of the students who come in contact with it won't go running, pulling their hair out in the other direction. There will be some for whom it will stick and maybe stick for the rest of their life. So I'm fairly positive about the RSGB using its resources to help organize schools.
Yeah, I think it could be, as much as anything, education for the rest of the amateur radio community to understand what's going on in other parts of our hobby. So that's where I'm going. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. So looking at the website for the RSGB now, this school's own page, I think it's just about supporting schools if they wish to, set up a radio station or a radio club, or, giving them a bit of advice, a bit of help. Perhaps if they want to, put them in touch with local amateurs maybe. I do know the RSGB have a pretty good safeguarding policy. I'm sure that will be followed, and that part of the advice that's given. And I'm sure schools get that as well. I'm sure there's lots of policies and things around that. So the Art's going to let you wander in without you've had a look at the appropriate checks or appropriate supervision. But yeah, I think it's just about the RSGB helping out schools. I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good way to get people into the hobby. And I'm sure that they will provide lots of advice and encouragement to do this. Looking at this, I think there are 4 schools currently signed up, 2 in Scotland, 2 in England. There's a couple of pages there. There's like a school storage page which talks about things that schools have done. One of the schools actually is a Sandringham school in St Albans, who I know previously had had an ISS contact and things, so I know they've got a very strong amateur radio club there. I think the head teacher is an amateur, and I think so. I think if you've got schools perhaps where a teacher is an amateur and they want to, get involved in the hobby, I think amateur radio provides a lot of scope for education. There's electronics, there's communication skills, there's languages, there's geography, there's lots and lots of history, lots of areas of the curriculum I think that amateur radio can help with. So, I think it's a good idea, and I think the RSGB are just providing that bit of help and advice for those that want to get involved.
Yeah, it's good news. Martin, what's your thoughts?
Oh, you left me till last, didn't you? Well, yeah. People in Bedford are going to be listening up now. I've got to say, radio amateurs in schools, you're creating a list of this. Where are they? There are 4 schools on this list so far. Now, okay, let's be fair. They've only just announced this. They've only got 4 listed. They're trying to promote schools with radio in it. To who and why? I'm really sorry, but listening to this, just reading the article, this very much sounds to me like a tick box exercise to try and prove that they are doing something. Now, rather than making a list, why not get out there? Get GB4 Fun back. I know they've sold it on and it's gone, but get a similar thing back. Promote amateur radio to the schools, initially maybe to go out, reach out to the staff, get the ability to promote it to the schools and the people within, show them the reasons why they should set these stations up, what the pupils can benefit from, give them the help and advice to get a license or a person within the staff licensed, provide them with links to local clubs that can perhaps help them out as well when the RSGB may be concentrating on something else. Bear in mind that there are many, many scout groups that have amateur radio groups associated with them. Perhaps enlist them to help promoting it too. I'm sorry, but creating a list, I don't, what is it going to do? It allows them to reach out to each other. Well, schools already have the ability to reach out to each other. I'm pretty sure that most schools that do have amateur radio stations already know who the others are. I'm sorry, I don't see this as a big thing.
Can I make a comment? I believe you said about the GB for Fun vehicle.
Yes.
I remember that well. And what happened, and it's going back quite a while back actually, it was successful, and it did get the information out, and it did visit schools and did a lot of work. Now, I believe there was some tax brought in on the vehicles. Now, I can't remember what the tax was, all the details of it, but basically overnight, the running of the vehicle within the London zone basically made it not economic to do. And basically, that's what put the kibosh on that.
The other alternative to that, if you can't have a trailer that has the station set up in it, you can build it in flight cases. You can certainly put an ICOM 7000, 7300 and a 9100, whatever, in a flight case, couple of antennas on. You could set up a station.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's what happened.
Yeah, I appreciate with GB4 I didn't know backstory to that, but there are much better ways. This if you're trying to promote it to school, maybe this is an attempt at the RSGP promoting it to schools. This does seem like the way out. That means they don't have to do very much to me. At least that's as I'm reading it.
Well, in reality, we never said we'd all agree with these things. Bill, did we leave you anything to say on this?
No, I think it's been covered really well. It's nice that they're trying something. And yeah, there's limitations with every kind of just put it out there and hope somebody bites on it. But at least they're trying something.
But Martin, let me add one little poster. I think Martin brought up some good and critical points, and we need to be critical. And I think our podcast team, both this one and our alternate, do that. And we don't always agree. And sometimes one will see one through one facet, another on another. I think Martin raised some good points. I'll just add this. Schools aren't just sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for some outside body to come ask them to be involved in something. They got their own pace. And that pace has gotten faster and faster, at least over here in the States. So that's on the one hand, reaching out to them. On the other hand, I think to help accomplish something that Martin identified as an issue, when I look at the RSGB's Club Finder maps, wouldn't it be kind of neat if every area had not only the clubs, but also the school located? So you can look in an area like, for example, Martin and Chris and Martin, you're involved with the Sutton and Sheen Club. Now, how many school clubs are nearby? And here's why I bring that out, because it helps on what Martin Rothwell just said. When you have these clubs that they know there are nearby school clubs, then you have some potential for club outreach. And while this, for lack of a better way of putting it, over here in the States, we used to have a hot dog manufacturer that had a Wienermobile that literally looked like a hot dog. And they actually have brought it back. And they hire young people, to drive the Wienermobile all over the country to advertise their hot dog. Well, in a crude way, that sounds like the GB Fun vehicle. That is not unusual. There are other outreach educational programs that do some of those things. But having the clubs in some propinquity in an online map to the school and university clubs, that would allow you to know who's next door. And I would respectfully disagree just a little bit with Martin about they know who one another is. A school has people coming and going, both student and then faculty. I've been retired 10 years. I know 2 people in my former department. Used to know them all, voted on tenure for many of them, etc. So schools are open systems, and Bill can probably say this as well. People come and go. So until you have the carriage, if you will, of maintaining that publicity. And remember, my comments were school-based ham clubs don't advertise well from my experience. So anyway, I think this is a good assessment of this. I would simply add those 2 things as a way of trying to address some of what Martin Rothwell has rightly raised as an issue.
Right. So, okay, Frank. Well, on that one, I was approached about a year ago to help a school with an amateur radio club, and the teacher at the time was going to put the information to the head. It's gone quiet for a year, so I'm assuming it ain't going to happen. Real shame, really, but I think sometimes people just don't understand amateur radio anymore. I think not only do we need to promote ourselves in schools, but we've got to promote ourselves full stop, because it's not in the mainstream anymore. So that's where I think we ought to be. So there you go. Right. Next news story. NCDXF to offer $100,000 for a solution to deliberate QRM. So I'm sitting here thinking, they're going to pay me some money to sit here dead keying over people and shouting wallow and tuning up? No, that wasn't what they meant. but it did amuse me, the initial title. Bill, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I read this over when Dan posted it, and it's an interesting idea. They're trying to figure out if there's a technology way to basically null out some of this deliberate QRM interference on the expeditions, but it sounds like almost like fantasy to me. I do the SDR thing, and I see some of the power of it, and I see some of the improvements in the software over time as people figure out better algorithms and better ways to deal with the noise. And yes, there's been times where I've, turned the knobs a certain way to notch out a certain noise so I can hear a station. But that really doesn't help when it's somebody just blasting a station out of the water. The example I'm going to talk about a little bit later on is I'm trying to get a hold of the folks on the rock off of Scotland, MM0UKI, and last night on 40 meters there was station right next to them that was having a QSO. They had their amplifier turn on, but their amplifier was kicking off spurs off to the side. And so I couldn't really copy the guys on the island at all because they're just getting blown out by this. I'm not sure if it was really intentional interference or accidental interference. So it'll be very interesting to see how this R&D goes and who actually wins this 100K basically it's bounty. If you can figure out a way to get rid of deliberate QRM, the NCDXF is going to give you $100,000 to do it. So it's something to definitely keep a track of.
So you're talking about, just I'm joking here. Yeah, we sort of triangulate on the QRM and send the Exocet missile in. No, I will behave. I'll behave. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
I'm curious by it. The initial thinking is that this is in the bag. 100K easy. Here's an easy way. Act on the information that you are given, because when you get deliberate interference and stuff from people, a lot of amateurs go out there. They track it. They track these people down. We've done it in the UK. We know who these people are. We know where they live. We can tell you even the model of handheld or radio that they have got. And if you act on the information that you're given, you need the law on your side to prosecute those people or fine them or whatever, with a really heavy fine. And then suddenly it becomes less appealing to be creating deliberate QRM. The other things I obviously thought, obviously ban PLT, ban companies selling products with PLT in, because that, as far as I'm concerned, is deliberate QRM. Maybe not deliberate. Maybe that's negligent QRM. We talked about the satellite companies that included it in their satellite box a few years ago. My neighbour has one. Of course, it's terrible QRM. But okay, maybe they're looking for Kias and people that are doing things. Yeah, it's a pain. I remember operating 2012L back in 2012, and I remember being on, I think, 40 meters, and someone was just keying the mic and mimicking my CQ call. I was just like, why? What are you getting from doing this? I do wonder, where have they suddenly got $100,000 from? But if they've got it, they've got it. But I do think that if you create QRM to broadcast stations or mobile phone companies, the regulators will jump on you. But you create interference to amateurs, you're kind of a bit on your own, because we don't pay for the band. In the UK, I would argue that Ofcom should do something in the UK, being they came out to someone's unlicensed key fob, for which they are the third user of a band. But let's not go there. Either way, anything that can help eliminate QRM in any way is a good thing. Sorry, deliberate QRM, because we understand that some people, you can't hear the person and you might accidentally key out their frequency.
Yeah, I get what you're saying here. Frank, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, to answer Martin Rothwell's questions, the North California DX Foundation is a large group. They're not a local club. They have members all over, and I'm sure international. So they're a big club, and they have a fair amount of money. They donate to the ARL frequently, if not annually. So they're a big organization. They're not as big as the group that Dan KB6NU works for ARDC, but they're a big group. Now, when I read this, I had missed it on Dan's blog, if that's where he had posted it. But the comeuppance is the Bouvet Island de-expedition, when there was some deliberate QRMers. And let's distinguish between deliberate, i.e., I know I'm going to transmit and I'm going to interfere with one or more people. I know that. Versus I've got a nonlinearity in my amplifier and I'm splattering all over, or I'm new to FT8 and I'm going to run 500 watts and I'm not going to look at my ALC. Bill talked about the first of those where you had some spurs or harmonics from an amp. So we're talking about an intention. And therein lies a bit of a challenge. As I've mentioned before, I've been working with the volunteer monitor program that the ARRL has, and I wrote a 50-page white paper to thinking I was helping with some technological stuff that would assist the ARRL in implementing that. In that paper, I had an answer to this, what I thought was an answer, and it used HF on the one hand and VHF UHF on another. I'll do the VHF UHF, and it was a set of receivers that would allow you to do direction finding. That is, that it's come in to play now with the Fox Hunt stuff, where you can just do a scan and find the source of the signal. And our listeners might remember when a ham in Chicago had a radio in a briefcase and was riding a bus, so they couldn't track him down, and so they figured out he was on the bus, so they tracked the bus, and they did finally get him. So that was on the VHF UHF side, and there are problems there for sure, well documented. Very elusive solution because the FCC doesn't have the staff it used to have. Now on the HF side, as Bill alluded, there are many SDR platforms. The Kiwi SDR is simply one of them, fairly well known, and they have an extension that uses a well-known method that everybody from NSA to others uses. At least 3 receivers that have what's usually a GPS time signal, so they have a very precise frequency measurement capability. And if you take 3 receivers triangulating the time difference on arrival to each of those, and they are polled with a constant sampling over, say, 20 seconds or 30 seconds, they can come up with a probability zone of where the transmitter is. I've used that with the VM program to take a needle in a haystack, and it's reduced down to a needle in a bale of hay. Here's why it's challenging for ham radio. For a constant signal with a broadcast station, it's just going to keep broadcasting. So a pirate radio station, they're going to keep spinning the music. They're going to keep telling you what their political views are, or whatever the reason is that they're on the air. And you can pretty much nail down approximately where they're located. Then you send in the boots on the ground with other RF direction finding equipment, going all the way back to World War I and World War II. And you see that in the movies today. The problem with amateur radio is that we tend not to transmit for long periods of time. And we've got multiple transmitters on the same frequency. So TDOA is a challenge there. But I'd outlined all that to be used with the then new ARRL volunteer monitor program. And Dan Henderson, N1ND, who was at ARRL and was over that program, said, nah, we don't have time to fool with that. So I kind of laughed at on the one hand, is that why aren't they working with the ARRL volunteer monitor program to do this? Is it because the ARRL kind of sort of doesn't really want to spend the energy or time? Hey, I don't know. That was just Dan Henderson's reaction to it before he retired after applying to be CEO and was not chosen. So here you've got a group that says, darn it, we're darn well tired of this with the Bouvet Island de-expedition. Here's 100K. Can some hams or some ham groups come up with some ideas? It's well known about the HF intentional QRMing, certain frequencies, certain actors, they give their call signs. You can listen to 7.200, and I could name you a half a dozen who are there almost every single day. And obviously, and they've said this, FCC is not going to do anything. They laugh at the ARL volunteer monitor program. So here's a dart being thrown at the dartboard, and I hope it hits a bullseye, because I hope some group comes up with this amount of money where they can implement in some fashion identifying folks that are doing some of this. And obviously, if they do some of this and nail some people, it's like why we have criminal justice to start with. There's a little bit of deterrent action. Now, our listeners that say, yeah, but the FCC doesn't do anything. You'll notice May 30th, the FCC had a notice of apparent liability for forfeiture of $25,000 against a CB operator. So they've gone after a CB operator. They've also gone after a ham radio operator for $24,000. It takes time for those actions to percolate up, because the FCC is not they're not part of the justice system. They have to go to a court and show evidence, and you're innocent till proven guilty here in the States, they say. And so they're having to present one side of the legal argument. And I know I've kind of gone on a bit about this, but it's important for our listeners to kind of understand the context of how this works. And I hope that this Northern California DX Foundation gets some good proposals, and I hope they have a winner, and I hope that winner can do some good, Martin.
Yeah, I think they we'd all benefit from people stop causing interference deliberately. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, not a huge amount more to say. Frank covered an awful lot of material there. Kind of back to what Bill was saying at the start, I think this is going to be really quite difficult. I think what they're trying to ask for is there some technology that someone can develop? And we know any kind of development of technology is generally very timely and expensive. That can, I guess, automatically find someone causing interference. So whether that will be a network of DF stations around the world linked together via maybe the internet or something, and some clever technology that then allows you to triangulate where someone is transmitting from or something. I don't know. As Frank was saying, it's difficult because these people aren't doing this continually. They're doing this in bursts, typically. So it might be difficult. But yeah, I mean, we all recognise that deliberate interference is quite annoying. And if someone spent, we've currently got a number of DXpeditions. You've got the Rothwell expedition. They had the Beaver Island DXpedition. If people are spending huge amounts of money and effort and risk as well in doing these things, and if someone ruins that by deliberately interfering, that is a real problem. But I suspect it's not going to be an easy answer.
Yeah, it's going to be a naughty one. And once you've found the person that's causing the problem, we've got to have teeth to be able to do something about it. Now, Leslie, I've left you till last because on our pre-chat you said there's no such thing as deliberate QRM. Have we changed your mind?
Well, like I said, if somebody put a set in front of me and said, "There's S9 noise," I believe you. If there's PLT, I can see that. Where I have an issue with, and this is mainly a UK thing, is I have radio amateurs, and I'm going to use the word whinging, because that's a sort of a UK expression. I'm sure there's an American equivalent about noise, and my answer is it doesn't exist. And I get a rather indignant response back, and they say, "Yeah, Leslie, you're talking nonsense." I say, "Oh, no, hang on a minute. How many official complaints went into Ofcom?" And in 1 year, there was a handful. On a scale of things, that's minimal. And as you're right, as we don't pay a license fee anymore, it's free. They're not going to do something that is actual on evidence based, and piece of paper and all the rest of it. Where's the official complaint? There's very few indeed. And I know radio amateurs will not accept that, but it's true. I know about the Northern California DX Foundation. They did the International Beacon Project, which I still use, and that's still very, very useful to this day. I think the idea is good. Frank has covered it very, very comprehensively indeed. And let's see what comes out of it. And yeah, and I do know that the picking up on another point that Frank said, I do know that the FCC do come down quite hard even on licensed radio amateurs. There was one recently I heard he was operating on frequencies he shouldn't and got fined, rightly so. And most of us police ourselves. Most of us behave. So overall, it's only a very, very small minority that cause a problem. So I hope that they find an answer to this. Sometimes, that there may be a technical solution, but it's like trying to fix human nature, I'm afraid. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And in fairness, I use my call sign when I'm in contact with people. And if I'm doing something wrong by accident, I'd rather be told and I'll stop doing it.
Absolutely.
What annoys me on the odd time I go on HF, because I don't go on that often, but I always seem to find somebody who's tuning up. I'm trying to listen to somebody who's a bit weak and they start tuning up on the same frequency, and that bugs me, I always move to a clear frequency, or at least I can't hear anybody on that frequency before I tune up, and then I move back to the frequency that the conversation's on or the QSO that's going on. But I think some people just don't bother. They just go, I'll just tune up, and when they come available, I'll get them, which is a bit of a shame. So it's proper operating, I think, as well.
Yeah, the other thing as well, Martin, even if a complaint, let's say, is deliberate interference, and the society or other people get the proper evidence in a proper legal way, in this country it's pretty much a slap on the wrist. So they don't worry about it.
Well, let's see what the guys in the States get up to, and hopefully we can get something sorted on that one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Move to our next news story, and I think we covered this about 4 weeks ago when it first reared its head. Martin, you published or sent me some more information about this, about AM radios in cars in the States, and they've kind of backtracked, and now they're still going to keep AM, aren't they?
Well, that's what it appears to be. With the original news story was basically there were a couple of car manufacturers looking to remove AM radios from their car, citing, as I remember, interference from their own vehicles that was just basically wiping out the AM band in the car, and it wasn't point putting it in there because obviously it's a bad experience for the customer. Now, there are a bipartisan group of senators led by Ed Markey and Ted Cruz that are pushing back. Now, I don't know what level of authority they have, whether they are going to get any traction on this, but automakers will be required to keep AM radio in their vehicles under a new bipartisan bicameral bill introduced today. That was the day that this came out a week or so ago, whenever I sent it to you. Legislation was introduced in response to an increasing number of vehicles coming out without first-generation radio broadcasting technology. Now, this is the AM for Every Vehicle Act. We obviously covered the removal of AM radios from cars a month or so back. They're obviously now trying to push back to keep them. In some parts of the world, you may be flogging a dead horse, but in certainly in America, I know that they have what I believe is called the EAS system, which is a system where the government or authorities can push a broadcast out, and it overrides like every radio station that they want it to. It overrides every TV station, every broadcaster, and they can basically get on air and they can say, hey, there's a tornado coming, or, there's a reason you need to not be here, or you need to take cover or whatever. And of course, AM just covers places a lot better than FM. In FM, yes, it works and it sounds great, but it stops a lot shorter than AM does. Satellite radio costs money. AM, yes, it's old technology, but it's an easy solution. If you're driving into that place where there is an emergency, and you don't get that message, I wouldn't want to be the CEO of a company that consciously took AM radio out of a vehicle in place of building just better electronics in their cars in the first instance. I've heard the argument, how you should go digital and things like that. America don't have, as I understand it, DAB radio like we do. They have HD radio, which is different, runs on FM or on the FM frequencies, as I understand it. But again, I work for one station that uses 44 FM transmitters to cover its region, and it doesn't cover all of that region on FM. There are 3 AM transmitters that cover it perfectly, and DAB doesn't even come close. I know DAB is a different story. Either way, I have DAB in my car. That is now completely obliterated by interference, but we'll come to that later. But the fact that they are trying to push car manufacturers to keep the technology in their car has got to be a good thing, and it's probably upset some car manufacturers who might now have to go back to the drawing board to come up with better electronics that don't interfere with AM radio.
Yeah, we'll be interested to see how it goes. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Martin covered it really well. The one thing to add is this whole public alert warning system that we have in the States here. It's on AM and FM. The original concept behind that was that during a nuclear attack, some of the FM stations will be gone, and the AM stations out of the region that's affected may be able to transmit the emergency messages into the area that's affected. The main thing is instructions on what to do. I was reading this paper a long time ago about this because there was a lot of, back in the day when they were still testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, there was a lot of experiments with AM and FM radio to see how they react. And I vaguely remember reading something that, when you have detonation, that that initial burst of energy that comes out knocks everything out. But then within a few hours, AM was actually the first thing to come back. And I think it's the frequencies that it's on. That's this. When I was reading this article about the bill, that's immediately what I thought of, was that old article I read years ago about them testing it during the atmospheric testing that we used to do, which is just awful. Let's just set a bomb off in the sky and see what happens. Our government's crazy. But anyway, back to the automakers. I mean, I would really like to see some studies done. Are they dropping AM because it's not used and it actually is obsolete, or are they dropping it because their cars cause so much electrical noise that they can't put an AM radio in it? That's the little hook on this story that I really wish I knew about. Aside from that, we'll see if this law passes and see what happens from there. I think when Frank gets his turn, I think he might have some interesting points on this, but I'm not even sure this law is going to make it through Congress at this point, really. They can't even pass bills right now for things we absolutely have to do. So are they going to worry about mandating AM radio for new cars? I don't know.
Well, I think, Bill, if you could, this is a wrong word probably, but to stir the general public up to understand that they really want this, then the outcry will come from the public. You don't put an AM radio in my car, I ain't going to buy your car. That could be an option, but if people understand why they should have it. Frank, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm glad this was submitted. We've talked a little bit about this, but there's a couple little things I will throw in. The public isn't of one mind. And if you look at behavioral studies, yes, people, are listening to more podcasts in their cars. I do a lot. They're listening to AM for talk, not music, for example, FM and even subscription HD radio. So you get into behavioral studies, it's like any other complex market. You've got different market segments. So I'm not sure that all would be, up in arms, if you will. That's point number one. Point number two, the car manufacturers are not being consistent in what they're saying. For instance, Tesla has said in one set of documents, well, we're going to drop AM because, we're electric vehicle manufacturer and, we got all these electrical things and little generators and they just cause a lot of noise. And so AM radio wouldn't work. So we're going to drop it. Okay, then in another document, both of these filed with different federal agencies for one thing or another. They say, "Oh, our cars don't interfere with AM." Because you got another thing. You're sitting at a stoplight. You got a Tesla next to you. Oh, our car, we can't put AM radio in our car because our car, the way it works, interferes with AM radio. But you're sitting in the next lane and your car has one. Well, that car might be interfering with your car. So, it's not just one car owner that, we drive cars in packs, right? So you got that one. As I've said on another one, if you had a neighborhood full of electric vehicles and they all generate RFI, then you're talking about radio frequency interference that has little to do with AM radio. It's got to do with other electronic devices. And shall we say, some people's automobile locks may or may not come on when you want them to. But that's a little bit of an inside story on the podcast, I will say to our listeners, and I'll leave that there. So here we have two people in Congress submit this act. One's a Republican and one is a Democrat, makes it bipartisan. I don't know. And Bill, I don't dispute what you're saying. We are having problems talking about basic budget as we record this podcast. On the other hand, I have seen historically when you get a relatively easy bill or piece of legislation that allows the two parties to show they're cooperating, they sometimes jump on it, whether they're for it or not. It doesn't matter that much, as you said, Bill. So it's not like the budget, or we're going to go into default, as a country. But hey, there's this stuff on the radio and car. Yeah, let's get on board and support that. The key here is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, commonly called NHTSA. They produce a lot of the regulation to make cars safe, and they came into being years and years ago when the Corvair by Chevrolet came out, and it was said to be, an explosion waiting to happen if you were rear-ended. So NHTSA is the one that helped get seatbelt legislation passed and things like that. My research center used to do the click it or ticket study in Mississippi, where we would have people go out to sample points and literally watch cars with binoculars and count how many people had their seatbelt. So we get these compliance rates, and that's kind of an important thing. Well, you have safety transmissions that are not part of the National Defense Program, but you get travel instructions, and where are they broadcast? Up in the 1700 kilohertz range, up in that newer segment of AM radio here in the U.S. You go into some national parks, you get guidance. Hey, there's a bear alert. So there's more to it than simply the programming that we have traditionally gotten, and it's sort of intermingled among these things here. So we'll see where this goes. Now, there's been a number of automakers, Tesla's one of them, BMW, Mazda, Rivian, a new one, Volkswagen and Volvo, all argue that it's incompatible. But we've had Ford Motor Company here in the past week or so go back and say, we're going to keep AM radio. And for the trucks and cars that we've taken it out of, it's just a firmware update away, and we'll put it back. I wonder how much of this is merely a firmware difference. And if that's the case, I wonder if satellite radio may be behind some of the initiative to let's hurry up and get rid of AM radio. Doesn't explain leaving FM radio, I will admit. So anyway, I'll throw those things in. It's an interesting game that we're playing here.
Certainly is, Frank. Certainly is. And as I say, we'll never be told the whole story, but there's lots of things for people to think about this way. Leslie, do you use AM at all in your car?
I don't drive. I failed my driving test many, many years ago. It wasn't my fault. The light was red. Absolutely true. But this is interesting. My first thoughts are, what have they got in the cars that would cause interference? And I was thinking about switch mode suppliers and all that stuff. And I've got no evidence to support that at all. And the discussion along these lines, that AM is better than digital. and the number of stations needed to cover a certain area. Absolutely right. Let's just see where the story goes. At the moment, what we're trying to do is it's a bit like trying to form a picture of a jigsaw puzzle when we've only got a few bits of the jigsaw in place. And I'd just like to see how this story pans out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got a couple of guys at our club, and they're big into their Land Rovers, and they've got old-fashioned Land Rovers, which the government's going to force them to take them off the road soon due to emissions. But they went, because they've been potty about Land Rovers for years, and they're a member of an off-roading club, they went to a Land Rover release, and I think they said there's something like 60 microprocessors in the current new Land Rovers. You know, each one of those is going to be creating some form of interference.
Yeah, my old-fashioned way of fault finding, you sort of have a good look, put your nose in, use your eyeballs, feel the vibration. None of that anymore. None of that nonsense. You just plug in a laptop and, oh yeah, it's this, and this, and this, and the whole sort of skill's just gone. But that's another thing entirely.
Certainly is, Leslie. The way we fix things has certainly changed. I found that out when I went back into work. But yeah, it's interesting. Chris, have we left you anything to say on this one?
Well, not a huge amount on the AM radio. I mean, I don't think my car does receive AM radio. I don't think I do it very often. I tend to play Spotify, obviously various podcasts through Android Auto and other apps and things. Talking of cars though and technology, my BMW the other day came up with a message saying it's going to update itself. It's an over the air update and kind of works via the phone. So I was thinking, if you're a mechanic these days, you're probably more involved with computers than you are engines and things. Now you have to know all the electronics work, how all the computer stuff works. It is now literally like a computer. It literally downloads an update over the air and updates itself. And in fact, my friend, he has another BMW as well, a recent one, and he did the same thing. In fact, we were out camping at the weekend. It was the bank holiday weekend here in the UK last weekend. I was in my camper van. He was in a tent, so he had his car. And we went out to the shops, and while he was at the shops, he said, "Oh, look, it's got this update, same as my car." And he hit the go button to get it to start to update, and then he found he couldn't start the engine for about 20 minutes because it was updating, and he was like panicking, thinking. And it was funny how various different systems started to come back online. Like, you know, when he was first, I think we couldn't open the boot. It was that part of the system was kind of locked down until it was updated, sort of thing. So it is. Cars nowadays are really just big computers and work in a very similar way. So my one is still waiting to actually do the update. He's still sitting there saying I have to wait for something to happen. I'm not exactly entirely sure what, but at least I know what to expect. So yeah, interesting how technology is moving on, and mechanics now probably need to know as much about computers as they do about engines. But there you go.
Yeah, certainly do. Yeah, I'm not knocking the garage, but my car's just had its tail fixed out in warranty, because the only way to open it is by electric button. You can't manually lift it up or drop it down, which is quite a shame, really. But I worked with the mechanic and suggested what I thought it was, and I wasn't 100% right, but I got him certainly onto the right track. And he was arguing with the manufacturer. When they said something, he was saying, no, I think the customer's right. So it was an interesting discussion we had, but nevertheless. Right, last news story, and really just a bit of an announcement. Bill, I'm going to get you to go first on this one, but the ACMA have just given us an update in Australia that they're taking back issuing the licenses, aren't they?
Yeah, I remember this. They outsourced this back in 2019 for 5 years, and they've apparently both agreed that they're not, it's not going as well as they were hoping, so they're sending it back to ACMA to be responsible for doing the amateur radio syllabus and issuing call signs in Australia.
Yeah, I was just saying, it's taking it back and doing it. Well, let's hope they do a good job. Frank, what's your thought?
Well, I think this is an interesting story. I must say my relative ignorance of ham radio in Australia was showing when I realized through this story that the Australian Maritime College was actually the one who was testing and issuing licenses. I had previously downloaded their license database with intentions of geocoding it. I have a long-term interest in our ham radio operators more in urban areas or and less in rural areas and things. But the data looked fine. I haven't gone any further with it. So I thought that was just a bit of an amusement factor, but this is not unusual with government services being outsourced. But, ACMA in Australia, they have a little different situation with amateur radio. There are two major national organizations, although I think one may dominate the other, but there are two there, unlike some other countries. And they say they're going to do it bigger, better, and faster. And who knows? They may well do that. That is probably not a bad thing. We see a fair amount of activity, certainly on this podcast and on our ICQ podcast digital voice talk group from the Aussies and the Kiwis and others in that neck of the woods. So I think this may be a good thing. I just thought it was rather humorous that the Maritime College is who you went to get your license, Martin.
Yeah, I must admit, it did sort of strike me as why would I go there? But I don't live down in Australia. So there you go. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
I don't really have very much to add. I mean, okay, Maritime College no longer issuing licenses, so the ACMA is now doing it. Will it make it easier for Aussies to get licenses? Will it bring the licenses into line with other parts of the world? Will it allow better or more reciprocal agreements? I don't know. I'd be interested to see, but I don't really have very much to add on it.
Yeah, as I say, this is more a matter of we've talked about things happening down in Australia, and this one came up by one of our listeners, Doug, and we thought it would be worth covering. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, like the others have said, I was a bit surprised. I didn't know that in Australia that it was the Maritime College that provided the licensing service, and it sounds like that's not happening in the future. They've lost their what's the term? Their remit, I suppose, to do that. I suppose maybe it's a change. I think it's been 5 years, someone was saying, since they originally took on this role. Perhaps there's been a change of leadership at the college, and I can see how they might get involved in issuing. It would make sense for them to be involved in training and issuing of marine licenses, maybe for marine radio, and perhaps they saw this as a bit of an offshoot from that. But perhaps they thought this is perhaps not part of their core mission, and perhaps thought it's best for somebody else to pick it up. So yeah, didn't know they did it. They won't do it in the future, but yeah, interesting that it's going elsewhere.
Yeah, understood. Leslie, have we left you anything to say on this one?
No, I think everybody's covered it. Obviously, that for whatever reason, they've parted with it, and somebody else is taking it over. And I just wish they do a great job as they're promised, and that's all we can really say at the moment.
Yeah, certainly, Leslie, and all we can do is wait and see, make sure it does happen, and maybe hold them to task in a year's time if there's lots of complaints.
As we do.
As we do, yeah. Okay, well, that concludes the news stories. Bill's on a hard stop. So, Bill, I'm going to get you to go to first. What have you been up to since the last time we had a chat?
Been on the radio quite a bit on the HF bands. Lots of DX. Getting some SSB contacts going since the bands are cooperating. I did work GB23C twice so far. I worked them once on sideband, once on CW, and maybe I'll work them again on DMR. What do you think, Martin?
Well, I hope so. But yeah, we'll cover that a bit later.
Other than that, a couple soda stations I worked near. Yeah, pretty normal month. Me chasing DX. One thing that I do want to add that's also interesting was I saw that Ducey Island DXpedition, the VP6 Victor Papa 6 Alpha DXpedition, is going to take 4 radio in a box systems to the expedition. This is the first time that they are doing it for the expedition. They tested it before on the FO/AA7 JV expedition, but they're going to test this. What this is this is the stepping stone between what I've predicted on Dan's blog almost 3 or 4 years ago, where we're going to get to the point where there's going to be DXpeditions where there's minimal human interference to the island or the region that they're activating by either depositing a station ready to go, or, driving a rover up or dropping something from a helicopter. So I talked about this on Dan's blog a couple years ago, because I saw the pieces were starting to line up, and I'm like, oh, this is going to happen. This incarnation of it, they actually have folks connected through 900 megs to these boxes. So they'll go on the island, they'll set up the antennas, they'll plug them in, they'll get the generators going, they'll go back out to the boat and remotely operate these box stations over 900 megs, and they're going to attempt to go over Starlink, get that connectivity going there. So they'll have some folks actually running the de-expedition pileups everywhere in the world. So like I said, this is like the big stepping stone technology wise. If this de-expedition goes well and they get, good large amounts of QSOs done, this will enable a lot of de-expedition groups to go to islands that, the governments have said, this is a habitat, no human interference or limited human interference, no camping. Well, they'll be able to go on, drop these off, go back out to the boat and do the expedition. So I found that very interesting, and I've been following this month very, very carefully and closely, because I want to see how this goes.
Well, that's an interesting way of doing it. So that'll be a good one, Bill, I'd suggest. Frank, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I'm intrigued by Bill's comment. There's a bit of humor. So the Chinese balloon was probably just the Chinese ham club that was going to operate a de-expedition in the state. Hi.
That's
No.
my theory now. They're waiting for someone to shoot it down so they would be on land, so it counts for DXCC.
But your idea, Bill, is brilliant, and I see nothing wrong with it. I just think that's just a very clever thing. So congratulations on that idea. I'll keep my eyes open as well. Well, Martin, briefly, I gave a couple of presentations for area clubs. One was on web SDRs and using them as remote receivers in conjunction with your local transceiver, using the free, not free, but $10 software CatSync. Now, these web SDRs have grown by leaps and bounds. So I had a good talk with the Vicksburg Amateur Radio Club, and at least one ham, Chris AF50Q, immediately got that software and uses a remote SDR in Birmingham and one in Tennessee to link to his Kenwood TS590SG. Sorry. Another talk was on optimizing horizontal loop antennas. That was based on my Practical Wireless article and more recent work with Play AC5Z. I've now got two other area hams I'm working with to install a horizontal loop at their location. And I'm available now, since I've got that work completed, to give talks by Zoom to those who might be. I've mentioned this before, but I did finally hear back from the new editor at Radcom, Ed O'Neill, M0TZX. He has accepted my paper on transmit noise in modern ham transceivers. I've given one talk on that work to the Long Island CW Club. I can do that for others now that that's been accepted in Radcom. I will say the results will surprise many hams at the transmit noise levels on higher price rigs. They may be disappointed to learn that if they've already bought. They may be happy to learn that. They're thinking about buying, but don't want a relatively higher level of transmit noise. When that will be in Radcom, I don't know. I know Ed's struggling a bit after following Elaine as the longtime editor. So having been at that desk, I'll certainly work with him anywhere I come. Just glad to get another paper out in Radcom. I will say that the library effort that I've been working with ARL on, Plant the Seed, Sow the Future program, is kind of blowing up here in my county. I happened to meet with the County Library Association Director for Adult and Youth Services, and she is going to involve every library in the county I live in involved with this. They're adding 3D printers and trying to expand maker spaces. And when she had heard how much experience I had with grant proposals and things, we're going to work on that. And I think local ham clubs will be doing quarterly programs on radio technology in the Madison County, Mississippi library system within the year. The neighboring county where Vicksburg is located on the Mississippi River, Warren County, their library director has already contacted me. She wants her library on board as well. So we'll see where that goes. But libraries and doing STEM programs are where the interest of library directors here in the States are. And hams are a great group to do it. So I encourage our listeners, if you're in a ham club, just take the time, go meet the director of your local library and just talk to them about what your club might be able to offer. Another little item I've been involved with is I'm waiting on the shipment of the FX4CR low power transceiver that's getting kind of popular on YouTube from you, last name YU, BG2FX in China. It's in the June shipment. But I've begun another design and build project for a portable station. Now, it's a testament to the old suitcase spy radio. I think that was mentioned by Bill, where it was a radio in a case. But back in the day, there was this spy radio in a case, and we see that in movies. Inspired by that and the fact that if you get a good deal buying a piece of radio gear at a very low price, you will spend more money fixing it up. So with those two things, I bought a Flex 1500 5-watt QRP radio on eBay about a year ago for a very low price. Works fine. I've used it a little bit. It's a True Blue Flex SDR and works well at 5 watts. But I've added a small brick PC because it has to have a PC to operate. The PC works on 12 volts, got 8 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs solid state drive, less than $100. A 17-inch USB-C monitor, one cable, handles power and communication. And I added a 50-watt QRP amp from Ukraine, from the 60dBm.com ham, who builds very nice products. That's got a great duty cycle. And then I added an ATU 100 extended ATU for that. Now, the monitor is mounted on the inside of the lid on this Pelican case. So when you open the lid up, there's your monitor. Everything else is on a resin cutting board on some foam in the case. So when you lift the lid, I can lift up the cutting board with all the equipment and prop it on the front. All the equipment's facing me. I pull out a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse. The PC manages the Flex SDR using the KE9S, a power SDR version, does the logging, does WSJTX, and so forth and so forth. So all I'll need besides this spy case is a battery and antenna to go from QRP to 50 watt. Now we'll see how this finishes out. I'm about 80% complete with this harebrained idea. And it just goes to show, when you get a good deal at something at the rally, Martin, you're going to spend more money because of it.
Yeah, but that's always the case, isn't it, Frank? And
yeah,
we always enjoy fiddling. Come on, we want to build something for ourselves. I mean, I was playing with some of the equipment I built some time ago. I had it out and dusted it off at the weekend just for fun. And it's nice sometimes to look back and go, I don't use it now, but great. It was good, but I enjoyed it when I used it. Leslie, what have you been up to?
Hi, Martin. Right, what we had was Silverthorne Radio Club, and we had the coronation celebrations, and we had a lovely lady called Racinda, and she did an absolute scrumptious spread of food. It was absolutely gorgeous. We had a small band, so we really pushed the boat out on that, and it was a really good event for the Silverthorne Radio Club in Chingford, so which was thoroughly enjoyed by all. The other thing we've got is a radio's just come into my possession. It's still in the box, and it's a VHF UHF digital transceiver ICOM and ID 800H, which I've been playing with and trying to work through the menus. But that's, I'm just going to put that out of the way. That's what I've been playing with. Not a lot to report, but because we've just started a new job, so we'll have to see how everything goes. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, okay, mate. No problems at all. That'll be good. Hey, now you got a digital radio, mate. There's no excuse why you don't join us on the ICQ Digital Voice Project, mate. You shot
I
yourself
thought
in
you
the
were.
foot there.
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah. No probs. Martin, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Do you know what? I've done quite a lot, actually, since we were last speaking. Of course, I've been on the talk group. I had quite a long chat with Phil down in Australia the other day. You and I, I'm sure you'll mention this, but we've been up on 23 centimetres FM, which has been a bit of fun because you don't often get a chance to go on 23. And when you do, you get left alone this night. There's nobody calls in. It's like you've got an entire waveband to yourself. But playing with that on 23 centimeters FM vertical with an omnidirectional antenna. But I do have a beam. I should put that up at some point. It's back up on 4 meters for an hour or so, or an hour and a half or so yesterday. Catching up with an old friend. Haven't spoken to in about 5 years. It just popped up and then like, oh my God, I know that voice. How you doing? But also playing with SSTV on 20 meters in the background at the same time. So wife was out and I thought, oh, why not? I'll go in the shack and switch things on. I can't remember whether I'd done this at the time we last spoke, but I did work 20 GB23C on 2 meters FM, and I think he was quite delighted for a 2 meter contact. He's been calling CQ for a while, and not many people had gone back. And he said, "Yeah, we're having lots of luck on HF, but 2 meters has been a bit quiet." So he had quite a good chat actually. He was one of the guys from Cray Valley had the call sign at the time. On they were somewhere around the Cutty Sark sort of area of London, I believe, and. Yeah, got a contact there, so that was all good. And then when I finished the contact, there were loads more people suddenly calling to him. So I think it's just a bit of activity and people tuning around. Oh, I'll have a listen and see what this is. It's more than just someone calling CQ. A couple of actually nice, long, decent contacts on both 60 meters and 40 meters, which was nice. Because normally when you switch on like HF radio, it's CQ contest, and that's sort of needs a 5.9 next, and come on, let us, it's wall-to-wall contest at the moment. It's getting silly. But I did get a couple of really nice long contacts on HF, which was really nice, just because it's one, it's different, and it's two, it's someone that you can talk to that is not just your local people. Because there's, if you call CQ on 2 meters or, wherever, there's the same lot of people that come back to you. Some of them are really, really nice. There's some others that I'd rather not talk to. But HF, it's good because you can just get a whole much wider variety of people that come back to you. So that was all good. And also had to do a bit of tracing of some interference on my car radio. I don't listen to conventional radio in the car typically. I'm like Chris. I'm more podcasts and streaming and stuff through the phone. But my car is fitted with a DAB radio, and I never really switch it on. But very occasionally, I'll switch it on just to see what's going on. And randomly, I had lost all signal on DAB. I mean, completely obliterated. It was like they'd switched off the transmitters in London. There was no point. Now, if you drive around London with a DAB radio, there are massive gaps in coverage. It's, there are places where it shouldn't drop out, but it does. But this was like everywhere. And I couldn't quite understand where that interference was coming from. And I spent a long time Googling. And I'm thinking it must be something to do with the car, maybe because the DAB antenna is not on the roof. It's stuck to the front windscreen. So it's not even a proper digital antenna. It's just a digital antenna. It's not even a proper antenna. It's just a bit of metal stuck to the windscreen. And I was Googling it. And eventually I found something relating, and it did point, it related to a similar car to mine, just a later version. And it said, if you've installed a dash cam recently, it is likely this is the cause, and it's because, one, it's probably Chinese electronics, let's be fair, cheap Chinese electronics, and you've probably stuck it right near your aerial. Now, the aerial for my DAB radio is to the right-hand side of the mount that holds my wing mirror. My rear view mirror. The dash cam is to the left-hand side, maybe 8 inches away. And I thought, maybe, unplugged it, boom, signal came back up again. But okay, there's the cause. Now I know what it is. I guess I can't listen to DAB radio in the car. I thought I weighed up the pros and cons of what I was getting with by being able to use DAB radio. I thought, well, if I want to use it, I'll just unplug the dash cam. But I'll be honest with you, I'd rather have the dash cam plugged in, and if I want to listen to something, I can listen to it in high def via streaming apps and stuff. So yeah, that is pretty much what I have been doing.
Well, it's interesting about the dash cam, Martin. I must go and check mine because I got a car from the same manufacturer as you, I've got one of those shark fin antennas on
Yeah,
the rear of the roof.
That's for FM.
Yeah.
Your dad, there'll be a little bit of wire, I guess, some kind of J-pole or something configuration. It'll be just behind the rear view mirror in the middle on the driver's side.
I will have a look because I put my dash cam up there like you, but I now got it working because I had a break in the cable when I installed it. But no, interesting. Right, you talked about various things and 4-meter contacts. I don't think Chris is ever going to let me have another 4-meter contact on his radio again. And
I think you've broken it. I think you've worn it out, Martin, to be fair.
I think you did. I did, yeah. And you've got GB23C on Monday, haven't you?
Monday the 6th of June. Well, I say me, not necessarily me, the Sutherland Cheam Club have been granted the use of that call sign on the 6th of June. We'll be there using it in the evening. So, yeah, but we'll come on to that. So, I guess you'll be asking, what have I been up to? So, we operated it with Martin up at Epsom Downs, Martin, a few weeks ago, and hence the 4-meter comment. So I was testing out some aerials. I think did we talk about this in the last podcast? I can't remember now, but we tested out a few mobile aerials and things, and just got it sort of working. Just testing some things out for the camper van or the RV, as you would say in the States. So did that, and obviously we talked about I think we talked about this before. Your hour-long 4-meter contact that you had. Yeah, I think 4 meters. I think my radio, I think it's now had its quota of 4 meters this year, so we're going to give that a rest now. But yes, we have got some things coming up. We've got a couple of now the weather's starting to improve, a couple of club activities. So both Bill and Martin Rothwell mentioned that they've operated or worked the GB23C special event station, as I think it's known. So yes, earlier in the month, I think from the start of May, or should I say earlier in May, because it's now June when this comes out, the Cray Valley Club operated that station, I think, for about 10 days from the start of May. From that, I believe it was from the Greenwich Maritime Museum, Martin. I think
Yep, that was it. Spot on.
I think they had a nice location there, nice historic location. So they operated it initially, and they're the same crew that operated the station at the Olympics in London. 11 years ago now, the Oscar 1-2 Lima station, which we also got together and operated as a team, and that was great fun. And I think it's probably the same guys that did this one as well from the Cray Valley Club. So they know what they do when it comes to these special event stations. So the Sutherland Cheam Club, so the RSGB have made that available to clubs and others to use. I think I've mentioned this on the previous episode of the podcast. Made that call sign available for clubs and individuals to use throughout May and June. Obviously, we're into June now anyway. And I've arranged for the Sutherland Cheam Club to have that on Monday, the 6th of June. And our plan is to operate 40 metres and 2 metres. So hopefully, Martin, 2 metres will be a bit more active. And we'll perhaps see if we can spot ourselves on the cluster, etc., and get ourselves a few contacts. But unfortunately, it sounds like a lot of folks have already worked the call sign. But if you've not, listen out on the 6th of June in the evening, from probably about 7-8 o'clock in the evening onwards. We'll be operating on. The plan is currently 2 meters and 2 meters FM and 40 meters SSB. So that should be fun. And then on the 11th of June, we're also going to be operating the Practical Wireless 2-meter contest. As a QRP contest happens every year. Well, every year apart from the COVID years. So we're planning to operate that as a club. It's a kind of all day long contest. But it's a low power. I think it's a maximum of 5 watts. I think. So it's a low power contest on 2 meters on various different modes. So that'll be fun. Now the weather's starting to improve. We're also starting to look forward to the trip to Friedrichshafen coming up in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. I think it's about 3 weeks now. Before that, the Ham Radio event over there, it's the 46th time it's happened in Friedrichshafen. So that will be always one I look forward to. And already starting to look at the itinerary of what's going on, and there's some interesting talks and things planned for that. So that should be good. So no doubt we'll come back with some good content for the podcast, and you'll be hearing that in some future episodes. Going back, I'm doing this in slightly reverse. I don't know things I've been up to, and I haven't done a huge amount of radio. What I have been doing is preparing the camper van for the summer, and I made a box at the weekends which provides me with USB ports. So I've now got a box that's got 4 USB ports and a 12-volt accessory socket as well, and that connects into the leisure battery using a power pole connector. So I've got, in fact, I actually bought at Friedrichshafen last year a power pole distribution board. and that provides me with a number of connections, so I can now plug various things into the leisure battery, including various radios. I've got a bit PowerPool mad now. Everything I've got now has got PowerPool, Anderson PowerPool connectors, which seems to work pretty well. So this box connects using those, and that gives me lots of charging capabilities for USB, so I can charge my phone and my tablet and other devices, and I can operate things that use USB without having to have the engine running or the ignition on in the camper van. So that's if it's overnight, etc., I can actually charge things up directly off the leisure battery. So that's going to be really helpful. And it's got a 12-volt connection as well, because there are a few things where that's also useful for as well. So I think that was worth doing, and that will be useful certainly for my trip, because I'm planning to drive over to Friedrichshafen in the camper van, and that might be handy for that. So yeah, that's about it for me.
Yeah, sounds like you've been busy, and as you say, we've got a lot going on in the next few weeks as well. Well, what have I been up to? Well, I spent too long messing around with a crystal checker. I was going to make one, then spotted on the various auction sites a little crystal checker which had a frequency counter built into it. So I thought, not only is it gonna show me the crystals working, it will tell me what frequency it's on, because a lot of the designs on the internet for making them yourself just have an LED that comes on. It works. It didn't cost a fortune. In fact, it was quite cheap. I had two major problems with it. One, the 3-volt regulator died fairly soon after I'd switched it on for no apparent reason. Probably that it wasn't any good. And fortunately, I can run it. If I run it on 5 volts, I'm okay. I think the chip will run between, I think it's about 3 volts and 6 volts. So if I run on 5 volts, I can get away with it temporarily at the moment. And then the calibration for the frequency counter, that the variable cap on that was no good. So I had to throw that away and put another one in. So I did that. But just a bit of fun. Spent too long on it, really, but a bit of fun playing. Went to an electronics show last week for work. It was interesting. It was a tabletop electronics show, one day only, and lots of interesting stuff to see, lots of people to talk to, and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself there. Have operated, as Martin will tell you, on 2 meters 70 SEMS and 23 SEMS, as well as on the talk group. So that's been quite fun. For those of you who haven't signed up for the newsletter and are getting this podcast on Sunday, you missed GB 23C on our digital project group, because I've been publishing this out on Facebook and places like that. However, and this sounds really interesting, a lot of the amateur radio groups for digital radios decide that they aren't going to publish it, or they bounce the post because it isn't on their network, or they don't think it's right. Believe it or not, and I know you guys are going to find this really hard to understand, I get no grief from the CB boys. In fact, a number of CB groups on the internet have contacted me and asked me to post in their group. So we do post in their group as well. So if you're around and you know about it, I'll work here Saturday with GB23C on the ICQ Digital Podcast project. Also, I might not be around quite so much in the next week or so. I've got an electrical fault in the house. Woke up Tuesday morning, early hours of Tuesday morning, to find we had no electricity, and the circuit breaker, the earth leakage circuit breaker, tripped, and it looks like it's the kitchen lights. Having removed all the kitchen lights, and it still trips, so I can't find anything else on the circuit. I'm probably going to have to find where the wiring goes and rip the wiring out, which is going to be a horrible job. And last thing is, I'm on the Friday before this goes out, I'm doing a talk for the Crystal Palace Club on our digital talk group project. And also the week after, I think it's the 8th, Thursday the 8th, I'm also doing the same talk, for a group in Margate in Kent on the digital podcast talk group and how we set it up and that sort of thing. So a lot going on. There was one other club did half mention about would I do it on Zoom, and I said yes, and they haven't come back with dates. But I'm busy doing talks as well as and getting ready for Freaks Oven, so busy time. So that's what I've been up to. Well, all that's left for me to do now is to thank the boys for turning up. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TC8.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Thanks, guys. Another good episode, I think.
Yeah, fun, wasn't it? I'd like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
It has been fun, and I think you need one of those signs like I have in my workshop that says extreme danger, I did the wiring myself, and you'll be covered.
Yeah, you probably. I'd like to also thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
Glad to be here, Martin. It's always a pleasure and great to have a chat with the folks here today.
Yeah, great fun. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Thanks for inviting me, Martin. It's been an interesting night tonight.
It has, hasn't it? And Bill was on a hard stop, but he's left us. But I'd also like to thank Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B, for his contribution tonight. Right, all that's left for me to do is say 73 to you guys, and we'll continue with the rest of the podcast. 73, guys.
Yeah.
73.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
It's time to have a look at the news in brief for me, Colin M6BOY. We start with news of Hamfest India, which has been confirmed, taking place in the Ahmedabad Science City on the weekend of the 25th and 26th of November this year. Now, this is a Hamfest been going on since the early 90s as a national convention for ham radio enthusiasts and has the usual attractions of a trade show, a flea market, and of course all the usual activities you expect, talks, etc. in that area. Now, it covers an area of 107 hectares Science City where the Hamfest will take place, and there's lots of entertainment and experimental knowledge that's going to be on show throughout the area. So, many worthwhile if you're anywhere near the area, as they say. There's also things like robotics galleries, amphitheatre, energy parks, IMAX 3D theatres, etc. So it really does look like it's situated in a wonderful location to not just be a Hamfest, but to be a great weekend. So I hope everyone going enjoys himself. As we release this episode of the podcast, it's the last day of the Ships on the Air weekend. It's going to be going on until 23:59 Zulu on the 4th of June. Usual events for these sort of things, operations on PSK 31, FT8 and FT4. And as I say, there'll be other bands that come up as per each ship is available as well. There's 15 participating ships in total this year that will be being involved. So as I say, lots of opportunities to work on one of these ships, as I say. And one group in particular that's going to be on the air is the Battleship New Jersey amateur radio station. So they're really looking forward to, as I say, working anybody from there. Contacting a non-participating ship for the award scheme doesn't count as the warning here. So make sure that the ship you're working, if you're looking for the certificate for this event, is definitely one of the ones on the list that is competing. So that's the Museum on the Air weekend as a last day of that. Links on ICQpodcast.com where to find out more information, of course. Finish off our last piece of news here. Ray Hode, Whiskey Alpha 5, Quebec Golf Delta, has announced his retirement from the position of AMSAT Orbital Elements Manager for the North American region. He's been working his position since 93 and he inherited a basic sorting program and been working on that faithfully over the last 30 years. Then they use a lot of other emulation projects, etc. now to produce the information that they now use. The good news is that SA his work won't go in vain. His colleagues, in particular Joe Fitzgerald, KM1P, will be taking over as they work on that project as well from there. So we wish Ray, obviously, all the best in his endeavours. As always, it's retirement from one position is never necessarily retirement from the hobby or retirement from having fun. And I say thank him for all his efforts there at AMSAT North America. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode, which is an introduction to spectrum analyzers. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this episode I wanted to do a basic introduction to spectrum analyzers. Now, one of the questions you're going to ask yourself, do you need one? Well, like all amateurs, we'll always say yes we do. But a few things I think you should understand before you rush out and spend your money. So, what's the difference between an oscilloscope and a spectrum analyzer? You look at them face to face, to the uninitiated would think they're the same device. Why does one cost £18 or 4 or 5 times the amount of the other? Well, let's look at it. An oscilloscope actually measures voltage against time. So your axis across the screen is time, and up and down the screen is voltage. Lovely, we all got them, and you can pick them up at Rally's second hand now, quite reasonably priced, and that you'll be quite happy with them. What about spectrum analyzers? Right. I'm going to suggest that these are something you wouldn't necessarily pick up at a Rally. Okay, a spectrum analyzer measures the signal amplitude, which is the height or the amount of signal, versus a frequency span. So it's frequency from left to right and a voltage level or a signal level up the screen. So that's the difference between the two. However, I've not seen that many spectrum analyzers at rallies, and it worries me just a little bit that you've got to think about if you're going to buy one. The thing is, you can very, 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 and did I say enough verys, damage a spectrum analyzer by putting too much signal into the input socket. If this happens, it will blow the front end of the spectrum analyzer. If it's a reasonably modern one, you may be able to get spare parts and replace the bits. If it's an old one, chances are you ain't going to get the bits. Either way, whatever looks really cheap at a rally, there possibly is a very good reason why it's very cheap. You know, the fair chance that it's been damaged. Now, often second-hand ones are pretty heavy, and I know that we got some Roland Schwartz spectrum analyzers at work, and they are monstrous beasties. I can just about lift them. They are effectively quite old, although they do very, very well. Problem with the one I've got on my bench is that the screen's gone faded now over time. It's not the backlight, it's the LCD screen's dying. And we put an external monitor on it, which works fairly well. However, interestingly enough, when it boots up, it actually boots up with Windows 95. Now, to run it as a spectrum analyzer, that ain't a problem. Yeah, Windows 95 on a spectrum analyzer, it's just doing that. And effectively, what you'll often find going back in the day with some of these second-hand analyzers is they were PCs with extra boards fitted in them to turn them into spectrum analyzers. Quite normal in that time of building these devices. However, as you well know, Windows 95 and Windows NT, I did find one with NT by the way, have long since been not supported by Microsoft. So you can't connect them to the network and do all the fancy stuff that you'll be able to do with a modern spectrum analyzer, because I would suggest you may very, very, very well get virused. And once you get your analyzer virused, you got a major problem. Now, a lot of the older and cheaper spectrum analyzers don't come with a tracking generator. There's some nice HP ones around, but they don't have tracking generators in them. And a tracking generator is used to sweep a set of frequencies for when you're doing certain measurements on devices such as couplers or doing SWR checks on antennas and things like that. Is it essential? This is your decision when you come to do it. Now, as I say, what you need to do is check the spec. Before you go out and spend money, check the specification of the device you want. I'm not knocking one nor the other. I went for a Siglent spectrum analyzer, and when I checked on the internet, everybody was singing the praises of this Siglent spectrum analyzer. And even the couple of guys I know got the Regal spectrum analyzers said to me, Martin, I wished I'd have bought the Siglent. The Siglent is about £300 or £400 dearer, but it has a much lower noise floor, which allows you to see signals right down at a much lower level, which is very, very useful. So you need to check the specification if you're going to go out and spend your hard-earned money. And let's suggest that you're going to get, say, a spectrum analyzer, and you're going to spend between £1,000 to £2,000, and they are in that sort of order. But if you're going to buy one, you need to understand that ain't the end of it. You can spend a lot more money making sure you don't damage your spectrum analyzer, so it doesn't just stop with the initial device. For argument's sake, the Roland Schwartz ones we use at work require a DC block, effectively a capacitor in a block of device, and that stops any DC getting into it. Now, you might want to run a high-pass filter, because we're not looking for the harmonics, the level of harmonic. I want to filter out the initial carrier frequency, so the fundamental frequency there. So when I can filter out the fundamental, I can look at the harmonics much easier, because I'm not having the distortion on the level set by the carrier. Attenuators are something you definitely need to have. You've got to put an attenuator on the front end. Most of these require a 0 dB input signal. Very, very low signals anyway into them. And your chances are, with a 5-watt transmitter, you'll want about 50 dB of attenuation. Attenuators don't come cheap, so just be aware of that. You will need attenuators. You may also decide you want to do measurements on, say, filters and aerials and things like antennas and things like that, in which case you're going to need a coupler, which you connect up to your spectrum analyzer and tracking generator, and that then checks. You can then see what the signal's coming back and do some plots on your screen. Now, couplers don't come cheap either, so be aware that's something else you might want to do. Next thing is, you might want to check for interference, things like near-field probes. Now, near-field probes are things which you connect to a spectrum analyzer, and effectively you move it across the device and around components to see where any RF noises are being generated. Now, for us amateurs, that could be very useful, because if we've built something and it is particularly noisy and we're looking for noise in the shack, that could very much be useful. Now, it sounds really silly, but I've seen near-field probes, in fairness, with a 20 dB amplifier for sale for like £300-400, and they're not as good quality, nowhere near the good quality, but a set of near-field probes from your local auction site, you can get for about £8, and another £7 will give you a 20 dB amplifier. So, buyer beware. Basically, you're looking for the presence. Is there a presence of noise, and how much is there? So, I don't think it's calibrated noise, but you just have to be aware. So, like I said, there's a number of items that's going to cost you quite a bit when you go there. Now, the uses of a spectrum analyzer, well, you can use it to monitor transmissions. So, is the output from your transmitter X dB? And you can check if it's within spec. You can check bandpass filters and high-pass filters and all sorts of filters. You can check preamps, making sure they're working. Yeah, you can also do a little bit of EMI testing, as I said, with your near-field probes. Now, you might want to do some monitoring or making sure your transmitter is doing what it said it's going to do, and we mentioned that a few minutes ago. Another thing you might want to do, and this means you're going to have to go out and about. Once again, if you go out and about, it's going to cost you money because you're going to have some form of external power supply. But you might want to do far-field testing on antennas. You might want to make sure that your antenna goes in the direction you think it's going in and what it does. So it could be useful on that one. The other thing is a bit of a site survey. Now, when I say a site survey, it could be your house. Are there RF problems in your house? Are there bits and pieces? So you go around looking for interference. Now, features that are important on most of these is you want as low a noise level as possible. You obviously want the smallest bandwidth resolution as possible, because if your bandwidth only goes down to 3 kilohertz, you could have two stations almost on the same frequency, and it would appear as one station. So certainly if they were CW stations. So, the the smaller the bandwidth, the better. And once again, if you have the option, go for one with a tracking generator. Now, if all this has worried you totally, because it is quite expensive buying a spectrum analyzer. We mentioned a good while ago about the tiny SA, the tiny spectrum analyzer. And you can buy those for about £50 to £100. Will it do what a main spectrum analyzer will do? No, quite not, definitely not. Is it worth playing with? Yes. It's certainly a little device that will cost you about £50 or about $50, and you can do some simple tests, and it's about the size of a mobile phone. So it's quite small, and you can do a few tests. You can certainly put an external antenna onto the spectrum analyzer as well, or a tiny SA, and see what's transmitting in your area and see what's what. So if you're not sure whether you want a spectrum analyzer, and you certainly don't want to spend out, say, £1,500 or more, let's say a tiny SA might be something you can have a play with and gauge whether you have a fancy to really use one properly. And as I say, the tiny SA also suffers from the same problems as I told you about any spectrum analyzer. If you put too much signal up the front end, you will blow the front end out. Now, on a tiny SA, it's going to cost you £50 because you've just blown it up. On a big spectrum analyzer, it could be a return to base and a few £100 to have it repaired. So, just buyer beware. I hope this has been of interest, and as I say, if you go and buy one, check the spec first, make sure you're happy.
The ICQ Podcast. Getting it said for amateur radio.
Well, everybody, as always, I hope you enjoyed our feature this episode, our introduction to spectrum analyzers. And as always, we'd encourage you to let us know your thoughts and feedback. We've got a new way of doing this now on the ICQ podcast episode page. There's now a way of recording an audio clip and sending it into us. So feel free to do that. And say you can have your thoughts on our next show. Now, talking about thoughts, we got a mail from Doug Rosser, VK2 Delta Charlie Romeo, and he says he and his friends were discussing upcoming changes for the licensing of amateur radio in VK Australia land, and he got a mail that landed that indicated that the Australian Communications and Media Authority is taking back the administration of licensing, examination and allocation of call signs rather than involving it to a third party. He says, of interest is these arrangements are consistent with our amateur spectrum management obligations under the International Telecommunication Union Radio Regulations and Radio Communications Act 1992. God, that's a mouthful. He said, interesting times ahead for the guys in VK land. So, Doug, thanks a lot for sending that over to us. We're going to pop that link on the show page there. But say it'd go great for Doug Dad to send over that bit of information to us. And it'd be great for everyone to check out that link and give us their feedback of how that might affect amateurs in Australia and maybe their comparisons to what they experience around the world.
Certainly is, Colin, and we covered Doug's email. Well, not Doug's email, but we covered this news story after Doug alerted us to this in this episode. And it was quite interesting that it was originally moved off to the Australian Maritime Group to do the licensing in about 4 years ago, but it's now come back. So yeah, I think it's a good move. Some interesting stuff ahead. Let's hope it all works out for him, Colin.
Yeah, exactly. And say hopefully it's a positive, and as say won't cause the guys any problems. Hopefully you all had the opportunity to take part in our digital talk group event that'll be happening yesterday or say certainly a few days after you get this episode download, depending on how your podcatcher grabs this episode. I'll say in advance, thanks a lot, guys, for taking part and join us. It's always great to have you guys join us as part of that event. So as I say, and make sure though you let everybody know about how much fun you had at that event, so you can let everybody know for next time around when we do, one of those talk group days. But more importantly, make sure you stay active on the talk group over the coming weeks and months, because certainly it's a great service that's there for everybody in our hobby, and it'd be great to have you there. Now, say we can't do all the things we do, say the podcast, the newsletters, the websites, the talk groups, etc., without your very kind support. This episode, Martin Malley, Whiskey Zero, Zulu Kilo, is our very kind donor. This episode, Martin, we really do appreciate you, being involved with us, and your donations, along with our monthly subscription donors, they're vitally important to helping us pay our bills. We'd ask you, if you find value in anything that we do, if you go to icqpodcast.com/donate, turn that value into a financial figure that you can help us out with. And as we always say, no matter what that figure is, no matter how big or small that figure is, it all goes towards our running costs and helping us do what we do. And if everybody helps a little bit, you'd be really surprised how great things we can do. So as I say, guys, really do appreciate everybody that helps out along the way. As always, we'd like to thank our contributors this episode: Chris, Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel; Martin, Mike 0 Sierra Golf Lima; Frank, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel; Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo; and Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, for taking part in the News Roundtable in this episode. We'd like to thank, as I say as well, Doug for his feedback this episode, and really hope you got something from this show. Right, well, I think just about wraps up everything. I think this episode, Dad, if I remember rightly, I'm going for our checklist here. I think we've covered everything. We're probably going to be a bit frazzled as we release this on Sunday morning after the digital talk group. But as I say, it's a great time. We've got lots going on. Talk group and Friedrich Sharman coming into the month, so there's a lot going on in the hobby, isn't there?
Certainly is, Colin. And, before we do the talk group, I've got a club talk to do on Friday evening. So a lot going on. I mentioned it in the rest of the podcast, but a lot going on, Colin.
Yeah, a lot going on. So look, we're as I say, we're obviously enjoying everything we do, etc. In as I say, what we do. So again, great to have you guys on board with us. And as I say, yeah, we'll keep doing your show for you. So as I say, we'll keep working away, and as I say, doing that show for you, and we'll have our next one out for you in a fortnight's time. So I hope you look forward to it from there. So we'll bid 73. Oh no, we won't do that. We're going to do something more important first, and that's Mrs. B's cup of tea and a chocolate biscuit. But I understand, due to some environmental issues inside the house, this could be a tricky time to make a cup of tea.
Yeah, it is a bit tricky. I mean, I'm not going to labour on about it, but we've got a bit of a power problem in the house that I'm trying to find. Keeps tripping the earth leakage breaker, so large parts of the house don't have power at the moment. But fortunately, the kitchen does. So Mrs. B will get a cup of tea, and she's already come through and got ready for that by getting a chocolate caramel wafer, Colin.
Wow, this sounds impressive. A chocolate caramel wafer. I'm actually quite jealous about that one. So, I'd say fingers crossed I don't trip the rest of the electrics by putting the kettle on. And as I say, enjoy that cup of tea, Mum. And as I say, we'll get ready to do another episode in a fortnight's time. 73's all.
Yeah, 73.